Hi, friends and family. Welcome back. Last week, you might remember, I read a selection from Professor Zach Loafman's paper, and I really do enjoy reading scientific papers. I think they're extremely valuable. They're easy to source on the internet. For the most part, if you know how to search for them, they're free, which helps. But they could be real specific. My absolute favorite way, especially when diving into a new species or even a species I'm interested in, is kind of the oldest way. And that's grabbing a book. So I'm reading today from a book that is extremely valuable and about one of the species I've talked the most about on this channel. It's this rainbow boa book here. This is Rainbow Boas, Natural History and Captive Husbandry by Henry Belosa and Hans Bisplingoff, the Chimera edition. And this is a fabulous book. And if you're interested in rainbow boas, I put a link in the description. You've got to check this out on Amazon. But I'm reading a selection on their natural history when we discuss the differences between ground-dwelling snakes and tree-dwelling snakes. And I think this is fascinating because this is the type of thing you're going to get in these books. So, on the other hand, tree-dwelling species are to be found amongst harmless snakes, Colubridae, just as well amongst terrestrial proteroglyphs, Elapinae, vipers and rattlesnakes, Viperidae, and giant snakes, Boidae. The giant snakes whose ways of life can be described as most strongly arboriculous include the green tree python, or chondro, emerald tree boa, garden boa, and the Madagascar boa. These species have in common a specially adapted body shape in the form of flattened flanks with strong muscular tension toward the back and an accentuated vertebral line. Figure 69, and here we go. So look at this. This is a nice picture. Everyone wants to know what a healthy snake looks like. These are cross sections of arboreal snakes, including the rainbow boa, and that's a good example. Their eyes are very large in relation to the size of their skulls and have a long prehensile tail and much widened ventral scales that typically extend over the entire width of the body. All of them, furthermore, have numerous subcaudals and relatively few ventrals. These generalized factors add up to a combination of characteristics that describes a tree-dwelling snake that is therefore different from one that lives on the ground. If we now take a look at how the individual traits compare with the rainbow boas, we find in Figure 70 a comparison of the relative eye diameter of the mentioned species with those found in Epicrates C. centria and Epicrates C. cassisi. What strikes the eye first is that the tree python and emerald tree boa have the relatively smallest eyes. The rainbow boas position themselves in the midfield, and garden boas have the relatively largest eyes. Even though length of the prehensile tail averages only 21.09%, that is relative to the snout vent length, the ecentria and therefore lies just a little above the 20.14% of the boa constrictor, so slightly just a longer tail than the common boa. You should take into consideration that the species of anaconda shows values between 23.74% and 25% and are decidedly not tree-dwelling. This renders this argument quite useless in our view. Only the garden boa with a value of 30.13% clearly has an exceptionally long tail. The ventral scales are almost as wide as the width of the lower contact surface of the body in most subspecies of Epicrates centria. They match in their width the ventrals of other tree dwellers, and only E.C. alvarezi has slightly narrower ventrals. The lower contact surface corresponds to 85 to 93% of the maximum width of the body. The numbers of subcaudals in the individual species are also shown in Table 5. Here, garden boa and tree python have substantially more scales on the underside of the tail than the other species. It is interesting that the Madagascar boa, the Sanzania madagascariensis, should have the lowest number of these scales. As far as numbers of ventrals are concerned, we do not see much of a difference between rainbow boas and other tree-dwelling species either. Only the emerald tree boa and Madagascar boa have comparatively few ventrals, and the count for the garden boa is even higher on average than that for E.C. centria. Summarizing the results of all counts in this comparison leads to the conclusion that Epicrates C. centria does not necessarily disqualify for being called an arboriculus snake. Considering, however, that the shape of its body and the relative length of its tail meet much rather the criteria of a terriculous snake, we tend to promote its classification as a semi-arboriculous species. Casually speaking, one could say it is both tree and ground-dwelling snake. So that's the thing I absolutely love about getting into these books, is it answers debates that we have. If someone wants to say no, it climbs, and other people want to say no, it stays on the ground, they're both wrong. This snake does both. And anyone who's raised a rainbow boa can tell you that at a certain age, they spend their whole day burrowed underground, and then come the nighttime, they're going to be up and out of their cage. They're climbing on anything and everything they can find. So it makes sense that we can keep them in a way that is going to allow us bigger cages and room for climbing, with of course humidity being the key factor in terms of maintaining the perfect environment for a rainbow boa. I'm going to put a link to this book in the description of this video. As always, like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. We do have another panel coming up on venomous snakes, so I hope to see you there for the Zoom live. If you miss it, we'll have the recording on YouTube as always. But definitely get your hands on a good book. If there's a species you want, there's a number of books based on just how to light a reptile enclosure, and comparing it to the sun, which for reptiles is incredibly valuable. Bioactivity. I recently read a book on king cobras that was great, and I'll never own one of those. So enjoy them. Definitely keep your phone handy, because there's going to be words that you need to look up. Some things are outdated, so that's always good to know. You might have heard me saying subspecies of Epicrates. This book was written before there was a total reclassification of the way that the Epicrates complex is broken down. So there's a few things that are quite outdated in that, but that's okay because it doesn't change the natural history. It's got feeding information. It's got where they're found in the wild, what they do during the day, what they do during the night, what they're eating. And then this book is great too. One of the absolute best reasons for reading it, and you find a lot in these Chimera editions that go into natural history, they also have captive husbandry, which means the authors of this book kept rainbow boas, they bred rainbow boas, and they reproduced them in captivity successfully. So it was the whole life cycle of finding them in the wild and reproducing them too. And I've probably read this book twice. It's amazing when I go back and read it, as I just recently started doing, just how much I'd forgotten. You think you know a lot about a subject, and then you realize that there's a lot out there, and it's really nice and enjoyable to sit down and read from someone who has spent years studying something to write a book. That's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed learning something.